This story took place when I was 23 years old. Close to 10 years ago. I was living in upstate New York in a very rural area with my ex-boyfriend and his family. He and I used to argue quite a bit. And one morning before he went to work, he and I got into a very heated argument. He was 20 years my senior, but during this particular fight, he acted majorly juvenile. He jumped out of bed, flipped me the bird and yelled, "If you don't like it so much, then why don't you go back to the Bronx?" That was all the prompting I needed. I threw all my eggs in my winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes and flew out of the house. I am unfortunately an impulsive idiot and didn't think to grab my cell phone before I stormed out. I didn't drive, so my only option was to walk. I don't think at the time that I intended to walk back to the Bronx, as I was a 3-hour car ride upstate, but I just needed to go for an angry dramatic walk. I realized once I got to this road at the entrance of the trailer park that I had no idea where anything really was around me, as I had only lived there for a few months at that point and we really didn't go out a lot. I bank left and just walked and walked where I knew civilization was. I found myself walking alongside a very busy stretch of road with 18-wheelers flying by, spraying me with slushy snow and soaking my shoes. I saw my then boyfriend driving by on his way to work and he sped up as he drove past me, evidently still angry about our fight. I thought for sure he was going to turn around at some point, but he never came back. I pressed on the siding instead to try to walk to my best friend's mother's house, which I knew to be in the same town. It started to snow, and I was losing momentum. I passed by a VFW where a nondescript pickup truck was parked in the driveway. It wasn't until I had passed it that I even realized the driver was in the front seat. He called out to me, "Hey, honey, do you need help?" My stomach churned, realizing I would have to accept the stranger's offer. I approached his truck slowly and tried to weigh out my options. He was a clean-cut, seemingly normal older white guy. Gray hair, greenish-blue eyes, just average. I blurted out, "Are you a good guy or bad guy?" And cringed at myself for asking such a dumb question. He answered, "I'm a good guy. I wouldn't tell you if I was a bad guy." I ignored the bells going off in my head and got in the front seat with him. As we drove, I realized I had no clue where my friend's mom actually lived. I knew the name of the road she lived on, but it spanned a good distance. So it wasn't very helpful in terms of finding my destination. I asked to borrow his cell phone so I could try calling my best friend to ask where I was going. I called her 3 times, and she didn't answer because she didn't recognize the number. I started to feel inexplicably hopeless. After a few minutes, he asked me where I was from, and while I was out in the middle of nowhere in the snow wearing pajamas. I explained I was originally from the Bronx, and they had gotten to a fight with my boyfriend. He paused and said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in make a little money, would you?" I chuckled nervously and said, "Oh, no thanks, though." He responded, "Just figured since you said you were from the Bronx," and trailed off. Realizing at that point, I was almost definitely in deep doo-doo. I muttered, "Oh, sure. He eyed me up and down and laughed himself before sneering, Sure. She says I started the panic big time, but knew I couldn't show my fear." I scoured the scenery for a pillowy snow bank that I could land in if I leaped out of the truck, to no avail. The houses are so few and far in between them, became certain this would be how I met my demise. I'll never know why. But it was at this point that he decided to ask me who I was going to see. I quickly blurted out my best friend's mom's name and her husband's full name. He instantly perked up and explained that he knew the husband and how they used to snowmobile together 20 years ago. I felt the greatest wave of relief when he explained that he knew exactly where his old buddy lived. When we only pulled up to that big yellow house. It was like arriving to the promised land. I sheepishly asked his name. "Steve," he said, and then as mine. I gave him a fake name, spat out a nonsense "thank you," and ran as fast as I could from his truck to the porch. I crashed through the front door and locked behind me. I immediately start crying and running through the house trying to find my friend's mom. I had awoken her from a sound sleep, but she didn't say a word about it upon seeing how shaken up I was. Once I knew I was safe with her, I explained everything. The fights, the fleeing the weird guy, and his proposition. And she listened, horrified and curious at the same time. She made me promise to never do anything so reckless again, and that if I ever needed her to call her, she told me she would ask her husband when he got home about the Steve guy and find out more about him. I returned to my boyfriend's later that same day and got really stoned and tried to forget about the events of that morning. The following day, and my friend's mom called me to tell me that Steve was a dangerous person who her husband had cut off communication with years ago. The last time I had heard about Steve was that she had been arrested for assault. She then went on to point out how incredibly easy it would have been for him to hurt me and leave me just about anywhere in some lonely stretch of road, and no one would even know where to look for me. Not to mention, I might not even been found until the snow thawed out. When I was 12 years old, my family and I lived in an old apartment complex. I say old because it's been standing for well over 50 years by the time we moved in. Some residents have claimed to have lived there their whole lives. Anyway, one particular thing that stuck out to me is that there was a strict no pets policy. The landlord actually elaborated on this, stating that a copious number of pets seemed to go missing around the area, and they now restrict pets in hopes that it would end that problem there as a child, and I kept pretty much to myself. As for my brothers, who are 2 to 3 years older than me, they spoke and played with every kid that lived in the apartments and surrounding areas. Every day after school, they begged our mother for some change so they could visit the candy lady. She was a local resident in the apartments who held a mini marts in her apartment. Basically, she buys snacks in bulk, ranging from gummy snacks to chips, so she can resell it to the neighborhood kids. I'd never been at that point, but was curious, of course. I'd asked my brothers if I could join them, and they declined. So I stole, a whole dollar from my mom's purse and followed my brothers and their friends so I could find out where she lived. Upon stalking them, I finally found out her apartment location. Though they stayed inside for a while, I figured I'd just go the next day. The next day after school, I took my stolen dollar and headed out to the candy lady's apartment. When she opened the door, she was an older Caucasian lady with a welcoming demeanor. She let me in and asked for my name. When I gave it to her, I asked for hers. She said to just call her the candy lady. She seemed sweet and thoughtful, asking me about school and if I lived in the area. Kids usually don't come here alone. Where are your friends? She asked me. I explained that I don't really have any and that I prefer to just observe. She seemed to sympathize with me because she then told me to take anything I want free of charge. As a child, I indulged taking as much as I could carry. While thanking her on my way out, she said to me, "Come back anytime, my friend." I felt pretty jolly at that point. When I got free snacks too, I actually made a friend. When I got home, I hid my snacks in my drawers, returned my mom's stolen dollar, and felt great overall. That is until I went back. I returned maybe 3 to 4 days after the first time. When I knocked, she answered the door frantically. I kind of got scared, so I told her I could just come back later. After realizing it was me, she told me no worries and insisted I come in. When I did, she asked if I came back for some more free snacks. I gleefully told her yes, but she said that the first time was a kind gesture. But from now on, I'd have to help her with a few things to earn my free snacks. I was used to working for things, so I agreed. It was simple enough. Just throw out her trash for her. I figured she was old and probably couldn't go outside much. Weird thing was, she had me take her garbage out to the dumpsters in the apartments next door. Fast forward to a month later, it did become our regular schedule. After school, I do my homework, then head over to her place to throw her garbage as well as collect my earnings. It was all easy breezy for a while. That is until one day she didn't tie the trash bag all the way. I walked all the way down to the dumpsters next door, and before I threw it in, I decided I'd tie it first. It was loose, so I had to untie it to fix it all the way. Curious little me couldn't help but look inside. There I saw wadded up paper towels drenched in blood and hair. There was also more plastic bags at the bottom of the bag. This freaks me out so much that I dropped the bag right then and there and booked it home. As soon as I got home, I cried to my mother about my discovery. She said she'd go out and see it for herself after I told her which dumpster. When she returned, she said she didn't see what was inside because the candy lady was already there throwing it out when she arrived. My mother didn't say a word to her and just left. She told me she didn't want me going out that far anymore and stop helping with other people's chores, completely neglecting what I initially told her. Surprisingly, I was able to just sort of forget, more like ignore what happened and go about my kid life like nothing else happened. Then my brothers came rushing back one day. They anxiously explained to my mom, who was as nosy as ever regarding neighbors, that the candy lady was taken away by police. My mother dismissed it and told us to mind our business. My brothers were bummed out though, because of their future lack of snacks. As a child in this point of time, I didn't really understand police and all that. So I was pretty much clueless about what happened. About a month ago, I had dinner with my mom. I am now 22 years old. By the way, my mother and I got to reminiscing and we started talking about those old apartments. After discussing how old and broke down they were, I asked her if she remembered what I told her I saw. At first, she didn't. Then I mentioned that she was arrested by the police. Then the shock of realization had her. She said she remembered, and then she actually asked the landlord about it shortly after she was taken away. Apparently, the landlord told her that the candy lady was actually killing and skinning animals she found nearby. So she's the reason why pets weren't allowed. She was killing them. And doing God knows what with the skin. And I'm the dumb little kid who got rid of the evidence for her. And for those of you wondering, the management of the apartments next to ours, the one with the dumpsters we used to dispose of the evidence, caught wind of the smell reeking from the dumpsters, and from there, and they were able to catch the candy lady. All I know is I'm glad I never went back once I realized what was in the bags of trash. She had me take out multiple times. These events happen over several months in 2016 when me and my sister, then 16 and 14, first moved into our most recent apartment complex with our mother. We now call it the apartment complex from hell because there were many incidents like this. Admittedly, we were still into the hoverboard craze then and would ride them around. This is how we met Savannah. She was our age and lived in our building. She asked to hang out and we were happy to hopefully make new friends. So we said yes. We hung out outside the complex of the little park. It got dark and we started making up ghost stories. Turns out she liked creepy paranormal stuff like we did. Note I didn't actually believe in this stuff and still don't. Every time I reference the paranormal, it's hyperbole. As we were walking home though, the lights in one of the apartment hallways flickered. And I joked and said it was a spirit trying to communicate with us. Savannah made up a flash once for yes, twice for no system to communicate with the spirits, and we messed around a bit. We thought it was just harmless fun. The next day she runs over to us excited. She informs us that the spirit that we had met last night told her its name was Karen and that it meant light. So it all made perfect sense now. We asked her how she knew, and she said she went back later that night alone to talk to it. This was the first time it occurred to us that she might have really believed in all this stuff. Our aunt had given us an old Ouija board as a joke the year before, and we thought Savannah might like it. Savannah lit up and said she wanted to try and talk to Karen. So we huddled in the hallway, connecting the apartments, and put our hands on the board. We kept getting random letters that didn't make sense, but soon, Savannah's questions were directed to Karen. We found her moving the plan shots and called her out, but she got mad and said she'd prove it. She took her hand off the plan shots and then no longer moved. She just huffed and insisted it wasn't her. Over the next few weeks, we did mostly normal stuff with her. But she kept talking about the ghosts and Ouija board until we broke down and played it again. This time we were introduced to a new ghost, Evan. We knew it was Savannah moving the planchette, but were curious about the story she was making, so let her follow through. Evan was a ghost or demon, rather about our age, who wanted free from a greater demon controlling him at greater demon's name. Kieran, Savannah, his parents called her inside, and conveniently, Evan had to go to. He told us he'd protect us against Kira, and especially Savannah. Savannah commented on how cute that was for him to offer. A few days go by normally, but then Savannah is back to tell us that she has a boyfriend. We're happy for her until she tells us his name is Evan. We're wondering what she's talking about, and she explains that while sleeping over at another friend's house, something had talked off her shorts while she slept. She'd woken up and heard Evan's voice, I guess. Then he'd visited her and her dreams and asked to date or something like that. She'd said, yes, of course we know she made up Evan. So we're kind of like, what's wrong with you? And we don't talk about the demon stuff anymore. Now Savannah was extremely possessive over her friends. When she'd see us with someone else, she'd text us nonstop about why we hadn't invited her. We tried to keep our distance, but she lived on the ground floor and literally watched out her window waiting for us to come outside. She'd latched onto us. We didn't know much about her home life, but she always seemed troubled. She had scars on her wrists and talked about running away from home. Her parents seemed alright, if rather strict and religious. We still hung out with her because we were worried, but were starting to feel weird about it. Whereas she'd randomly show up holding her hand out, saying Evan was holding her hand. She'd look at random things and laugh when no one else is talking because Evan had told her a joke. Once she made us feel her cheek where it was supposed to be warm from Evan kissing her. It was not warm. One day my sister and I were bored from her talking to Evan on the Ouija board. She was still controlling the whole thing and wanted some fun. I texted my mom to call my phone from a blocked number and play creepy sounds. Looking back, this was one of the dumbest things I did. But at the time, it was just for fun. My mom made the call and I put it on speaker. Savannah's living for it, especially when my mom played a track from a scary movie about a ghost. My mom took it a step further and threw a banana off her third-story balcony for us to see. Savannah said it was a sign that Karen was winning. We had no idea of the fire this would light in her. We were about to tell her was a prank, but again her mom called her inside. She found us the next day and I came clean about the prank. She laughed and said there was no way we could have done that. I said no, my mom literally did all of it. While Savannah had told her friend about it, who told her that yellow objects like the banana were a sign of the devil. And seeing them meant the devil was hunting you. This was all she talked about for a while, but since nothing else happened, she gradually forgot. Things went back to normal for a while until Autumn moved in. Autumn and Savannah connected instantly because of their history with depression. Autumn was a few years younger than us, but had a lot more of a past. This included significant time spent in psychiatric facilities and violence towards her classmates and family. On Unclaimed, she heard demons talk to her at night, and just like that, the ghost stuff had started again. Savannah felt threatened by Autumn and felt the need to one-up her with ghost stuff. She told her Evan was her ghost brother that looked out for her. I was like, hold on, you claimed he was your boyfriend. She giggled and said, that's gross. He's my brother. Her story completely switched. Now she was dating another demon named Jacob and they were engaged. She even showed us a ring to prove it. The next week or so was literally like a match between them to see who was the darkest and most involved in the spiritual world or whatever. They'd compare scars on their wrists and brag about cutting themselves and doing things like sneaking out in the night. In a move to one-up Autumn, Savannah drew a giant pentagram in the parking lot with chalk. Her parents found out and she backed out and blamed it on Autumn. The next freaking day, people come to repave the parking lot. The pentagram is now buried under it forever, literally. Savannah moved on, saying her friend had found Jacob's body and was going to put his spirit back inside it. Savannah continued to take advice from this friend who fueled everything she did. Savannah now said the friend was teaching her witchcraft. We mostly avoided her at this point, but she'd asked us to do things like make holy water with her and try to summon her familiar. From that point on, she insisted she was a buyer, witch, and walked around wearing all black with Halloween-like makeup on her face. She and Autumn frequently snuck out together, and occasionally we'd see cop cars at her house. My sister and I were avoiding them both. But now we'd get fiery texts from both of them if we hung out with other people, especially our guy friends. Once they saw us get home and stood in the parking lot pretending to be possessed. Autumn also cut off all of her hair and claimed to have tried to kill her teacher. My sister and I knew it was nonsense, or at least we hoped, but Savannah took it so seriously. She'd go around telling neighbors of terrible crimes she committed or wanted to come MIT. She even told us that when she'd first seen us outside with hoverboards, that she'd wished for them to blow up. One day, we again saw the police come to our door, and the officers had jackets that said that they were from the Juvenile Justice Department. Her mom pulled me, my sister, and her mom aside to explain what was going on. Apparently, 2 years before they discovered Savannah talking with a man online, her messages to him were hiring him to come literally kill her parents. After making threats of killing them a few days before, we were able to confirm the story after pet sitting for them and finding court papers about it. We'd known she was on probation. But she'd always tell us different stories as to why Savannah continued to beg us to hang out with her after that, even inviting herself to spend the night. We avoided her at all costs, but she'd followed us everywhere. That kind of died down when Anna moved out and Savannah moved with her family shortly after. Since then, she started doing service hours at a horse stable and graduated high school. I really hope she's gotten happier hands, more stable overall. Anna messaged my sister a few months ago asking you to call her mom to confirm she was with us. She wasn't. And we later saw her with a 19-year-old dude. She's 14 now. Me and my sister and mom have moved as well. There were too many incidents in those apartments. Our new place is so quiet and peaceful. And I hope to keep it that way.